Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Now and forever.
Today's saint, St Rose of Lima, is the patroness of America, specifically Latin America, but frequently the two continents are not distinguished by Italians and the popes, so the patroness of America in general. She was born at Lima in Peru on the 20th of April in 1586, died on the 30th of August of 1617 at the age of 31. As a child, she was remarkable for great reverence and love for God. She was taught this by her parents. From that early age, her life was given up to prayer and mortification. She had an intense devotion to the child Jesus and to his Blessed Mother, Our Lady. She was scrupulously obedient and hardworking, making rapid progress by earnest attention to what her parents were teaching her, also to her studies. She had a great mind and she developed it, but also to domestic tasks, to needlework in particular. Later on, she was able to make exquisite works of lace that she sold to support her family. After reading the life of St. Catherine of Siena, she determined to take that saint as her model. She began to fast 3 times a week, adding secret severe penances. When her vanity was assailed, she cut off her beautiful hair. She wore coarse clothing and roughened her hands with toil. All this time, she had to struggle against the objections of her friends, the ridicule of her family, and the censure of her parents. She persevered, spending many hours before the Blessed Sacrament and receiving communion daily. Finally, she determined to take a vow of virginity, inspired by supernatural love for God, and she adopted extraordinary means to fulfill it. At the outset, again, she had to combat the opposition of her parents, who didn't quite understand why she was doing what she was doing and were not in agreement. They wished her to marry and to make the family rich and powerful. They wanted to have grandchildren, etc., so they opposed the daughter. For 10 years, the struggle continued before she won by patience and prayer, and she obtained their consent to continue her mission. Her life was not easy. These virtues didn't come easily. She had to fight the contrary temptations against purity, against faith, against constancy, causing her excruciating agony of mind and desolation of spirit. And she responded to this by more prayer and more mortification. Our Lord daily manifested himself to her to encourage her on her upward ascent towards holiness. Her days were filled with acts of charity and hard work. Her exquisite lace and embroidery helped to support her home, while her nights were devoted to prayer and penance. When her work permitted, she retired to a little grotto which she had built with her brother's aid in their small little garden, and there she passed her nights in solitude and prayer. We'll go back to this little grotto in just a minute at the end. Overcoming the opposition of her parents, with the consent of her confessor, she was allowed to become practically a recluse in this cell. She lived there permanently, except for visits to the Blessed Sacrament, except to receive Holy Communion. In her 20th year, she received the habit of St. Dominic, the third order of St. Dominic, and continued to live at home, however. It's important to remember this. She did not live in a convent, but at home. Our Lord revealed himself to her frequently, flooding her soul with such inexpressible peace and joyous to leave her in ecstasy for hours. And at these times she offered to him all her mortifications and penances in expiation for offenses against his divine majesty, for the idolatry of her country, for the conversion of sinners, and for the souls in purgatory. After her death, which again is in 1617, after her death, miracles followed. She was beatified in 1667, and soon after that canonized in 1671. She was the first Latin American, to be so honored. She is represented wearing a crown of roses, but it's important to remember that in life, under this crown of roses, which she did sometimes wear, under this crown of roses, she wore a penitential crown of metal spikes. Her glory was always the fruit of her penance. Now, the spiritual takeaway from her life about courage and trust. So St. Rose of Lima inherited from her mother a great fearfulness. She was particularly afraid of the dark. And she was so afraid of the dark, when it was dark, she wouldn't go from one room in the house to another, except for strict necessities. So for example, to pray, she would leave one room and go to another with a candle. She would overcome all fears, face those fears and overcome them. But otherwise, she was too timid. Her mom was the same way. So it once happened that she was praying in that little grotto in the garden that she had built with the help of her brother. Before she became a recluse, she used to go from the house to the grotto and became late. Her mom was worried. It's dark already. Where is she? Is she okay? So she wanted to go look for her. But the mom is likewise very afraid of the dark. So she wouldn't go out there alone. So she gets her husband. And together with the husband, they go look for the daughter. When Rose saw them, she immediately ended her prayer, went to meet them. Excusing herself for her tardiness, she went back with them to the house. But on the way, she began to say to herself, how is this? My mother, who is as timid as I am, feels safe in the company of her husband. And I am afraid, even though I am accompanied by my spouse, the King of heaven, who without ever leaving me is continually at my side and in my heart. This reflection made such an impression on her mind that it banished from her every terror. So that from that time she was no longer afraid of anything, or rather she faced all her fears and overcame all her fears. And in any appearance of danger, she would say, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. This little episode is a lesson for us on how to deal with fear. So both the mother and the daughter, the mother of St. Rose and St. Rose herself, in life had certain fears. We all have certain fears and anxieties and inhibitions. We all have our limits. The way to overcome these fears is not to wait for them just to go away, because they will not, but to face them when they are still there. St. Rose and her mom had to go into the dark, acted against their fears. They did what their fears prevented them from doing. Why? Because, again, the mom had her husband with her. Great motivation. St. Rose had a greater motivation. Our Lord was always with her. She realized this, and this helped her to face and overcome all her fears. The feeling was still there. That doesn't go away. But she was able to face it, overcome it, act against it. That's the way we overcome fear. We don't just wait for it to go away. It won't. We have to face it and overcome it. Now, about our Lord being with us, this should fill us with confidence. If we are in this state of grace, then our Lord is always with us. That's why we should beg Our Lady to keep us in the state of grace, to help us come back in the state of grace if somebody should have the misfortune to lose grace. And deepen that state of grace so as to be as close to our Lord as possible, and then we will be able to conquer every fear, none excluded. Praised be Jesus and Mary, now and forever.